Reason 13.1 has just been released. It brings along 2 new players and some quality of life improvements. I really liked Reason 13. After I'd already made my videos on it, some people pointed out some things with the browser and stuff that I think were lacking and were kind of deal breakers for a lot of people. But these are pretty much fixed in the 13.1 update. I still think Reason Studios should change their business model in regards to how they sell the Reason Rack, but I'm not going to talk about that in this video. If you're interested on my thoughts in regards to what I think they should do, check out my last video on Reason 13, which I will link in the description. In this video, I'm going to talk briefly about the quality of life improvements, but I'm not going to go into those in too much detail because Ryan has made a fantastic video on the Reason Studios channel that really demonstrate all of these really well. So I won't bother repeating all of that information. I'll link that in the description as well. What I do want to do is show you a few examples of how I've been using these new players, which really excited me. I think they are fantastic additions. The way that I kind of viewed them when I first saw them and started using them is I feel like they're kind of like glue to the other players. I feel like these 2 new players have really rounded out everything that is offered by players in Reason in general. Let's just talk quickly about the new browser. A couple of things that I really like that have been added. There is now a favorite tag as well as a hidden tag. So you can get rid of all of the ones that you don't want to see. And you can add user tags. You can also change how effects are categorized and assign individual tags to them. I really like how they've updated the browser in this 13.1 update. I think it is still kind of silly that it's taken this long to get to this point. Remember, Reason 12 was when they first started making a big deal about browser updates. Since then, did we have a 12.1 update? I can't even remember, but then there was Reason 13 and now 13.1. There have been at least 3 or 4 updates where we have had browser updates as the main feature. But I am pretty happy with the state of the browser currently. I think they've finally got it to a really good place. What I still don't like, and is super annoying, it does not leave the bounds of the Reason Rack plugin. It may as well not be floating at this point. What you'll notice is going to be a theme in my criticism of this update is recently it seems Reason kind of just goes far enough to do the thing but doesn't go quite far enough to actually make it awesome. And this is a good example of that. This would be so much more useful if it wasn't stuck within the bounds of the plugin. But yeah, I'm not going to talk too much about the rest of the browser updates and stuff. I've only scratched the surface of it. Again, check out Ryan's video to see all of those in detail because there's a lot of really cool things you can do with the browser now. All right, let's get into my example 1. Aside from the drums, everything else is coming from this Reason plugin here. What I've got going on, chord sequencer, and then that is going into this Note Tool player, which is one of the new players. The cool thing about Note Tool is it gives you a ton of ways to adjust the MIDI notes coming in to the player. So we've got this filter up here, which you can determine which notes get restricted by pitch or by velocity. I'm not using velocity at the moment, just pitch. And so you can see that the chord sequencer is sending the MIDI data into here. It's changing. I've added a root at the bottom, but it's getting cut off by this filter. We'll talk about why in a minute. From the filter, it's going to this adjust section. Here you can change the pitch, which I'm not doing anything, so it doesn't really matter what's happening here. You can change the octave things are in. In fact, I don't think I'm using this at all right now. You can change the velocity curve. There's a lot of really cool stuff you can do here. All right, this is controlling this polytone, which is this one. And then I've also got this Ripley and this LFO. So this note tool is using the notes inside this range to play the polytone. So this is where it gets really cool. Here's my first note tool, and it's receiving the notes from the chord sequencer, and I added a root note. But I restricted the root note so it's not getting played by this note tool. However, if you flip the rack around, what you can do is take the notes that are rejected and send them somewhere else using CV. What I'm doing is taking the note that was rejected here and sending it to this note tool. And you'll see that pop up if I play it. It's playing a bass that is monophonic, so we're not getting any kind of crossover, but I don't think it's supposed to be doubling up notes here. Like that, and that. Talk more about that in a second. Oh, I should have been soloing the bass for you. This is what the bass sounds like. So I've got those two happening there, the chord stab and the bass. Now I'm sending the audio out of the Reason Rack into different tracks in Ableton, but it's all getting controlled by this Reason Rack plugin. Then I have this final section, which is this. Just this radical piano into this Ripley. You'll notice I have a new chord sequencer here. This chord sequencer is going into the note tool. I've restricted the chords a little more heavily here, and then I'm using a dual arpeggio underneath to play melodies with the notes that are generated by the chord sequencer. Well, if I turn off the drums, everything that you hear right now is coming from this single Reason plugin. And we're really just using Note Tool in some really creative ways to split the MIDI and send it different places and control it in some different ways. Now, I said before that you'll notice there's a separate chord sequencer here. This is because I ran into a rather significant problem. And this is where I don't think Reason Studios have gone far enough in implementing their idea. I originally started with this one. My original idea was to have the chord sequencer here into the note tool here. What I would do then is same thing, I'd have the rejected notes going and playing the bass, but then I would have the passed notes, which are the ones that are controlling the synth, also controlling the radical piano. Because why not, right? That seems to be how it should hypothetically work. But you'll notice when I play this, that something weird is going on down here in the note tool. You'll see it's just infinitely stacking the notes. If you shorten these here and then play it, you don't get that problem. But that also doesn't necessarily have the right vibe. So I was like, am I missing something here? Because it doesn't seem to be working how I'm expecting it to. So I emailed Reason Studios, and Ludwig, who is a product designer, he told me this. He said, Note Tool receives MIDI notes, chords, that are end to start with no gaps in between. These notes are converted to CV and gate, but with no gap between the notes, the gate won't close, there is no note off. This means that when new note CV values are received, new notes are added, but the previous notes will keep sounding, leading to stacked notes as you hear. That's what I thought was going on. He said some workarounds. Shorten the incoming notes so that there's a gap between them. I already tried that, and that like I said, change the vibe too much. Then he suggested instead of connecting gate out from the passed gate on the first note tool, use the gate out on the chord sequencer. Those gates have it separated by a tiny amount to make sure stuff like this works better. I was like, okay, let's try that. So that would be the second example I set up here. Same thing, only when I flip the rack around, I've got the chord from the gate going directly from the chord sequencer, and the Stevie still going from the note tool. This is how Ludwig told me to set it up. He sent me a screenshot of what I should do. This doesn't solve the problem though. I'm not entirely sure what is happening here, but when we look at what the note tool is receiving, we can see that everything is at a fixed velocity and there's only 3 notes going on. There's definitely more than 3 notes happening up here. What I would have been expecting to see is literally the same thing that's happening in this one here, only down here. So I wasn't really sure what that is doing. It didn't fix the problem exactly because it gave me the same velocity for everything and seemed to be creating less notes. So I decided I couldn't use that either. Ludwig also said, if possible, use CV gate for monophonic sounds, then overlapping notes just become legato lines, like what was happening with the bass earlier. He said the whole CV gate system is inherently monophonic in reason, as in real life, and the fact that polyphony sort of works is a bit of a happy accident. He said, I think we should look into adding a gap setting on the chord sequencer that automatically separates all chords by a few ticks. This wasn't really needed when the chord sequencer was released because we didn't have the note to CV conversion added with the note tool at that point, but it makes sense now. He said, I don't know when that could happen though. And so really appreciate Ludwig for getting back to me with that information, but I was a little frustrated because this is what I mean, like Reason will do something that looks awesome and is awesome, by the way. I love Note Tool, I think it's great. But it's like they just went not quite far enough to where it would have actually been really, really useful. Now, if there are legitimate technical limitations with CV being mono and stuff, cool, that's fine, doesn't matter. But I wanted to mention this because one of the things that I think they have kind of presented Note Tool as is the ability to be able to like daisy chain notes that are kind of like received and whatnot. I thought I knew what the problem was when I was getting all of the stacking, but I wanted to mention it anyway in case somebody gets super stuck and doesn't know how to fix it or doesn't know what the issue is, because apparently, according to Ludwig, it's actually not an issue. It's actually kind of, well, it's an issue for the end user, but it's behaving kind of how we would expect it to. Yeah, I think they really should add that thing that makes these a little bit smaller by a couple of ticks, because that would probably solve this issue, I think. Anyway, what I ended up having to do in order to achieve what I was trying to achieve is simply duplicate the chord sequencer and set it up the exact same way but controlling the piano. That's not a big deal. If there are technical limitations, cool, we can work around those. But from what Ludwig was saying, there seems to be a fix for this, and also I don't think it was super clear in terms of how Note Tool was presented that you can't daisy chain in that way. So now you know. Okay, let's talk about example 2. This is an example of something I thought you could do with Note Tool. Ryan also demonstrates this in his video about the players, so check that out as well for a slightly different take on it. Let me play it to you and then we'll talk about what's going on. I recorded a little bass line into Pattern Mutator, and then I had that going into a note tool here, and then going into a Europa here. Maybe if I turn the restrictions off, it'll show us what the exact melody is. So that was the melody that I recorded into Pattern Mutator. Now I'm using Note Tool to create some restrictions, and you'll see that we have a bunch of notes that are getting excluded based on velocity this time. Then what I'm doing, I've got the rejected notes going into this CV splitter, and then I'm taking the CV into 3 more instances of Note Tool. And each of these instances of Note Tool is controlling a different patch of another Europa. And these are playing only the rejected notes. So I've got a little combinator up here that's controlling them. I didn't like that one, I decided not to use that one. You can see that I also automated a bunch of these parameters, which is why they're moving. And this bass line is probably a little too busy and chaotic, but I just wanted to test the idea of using Note Tool to split apart a melody and have different instruments play different textures of it, and then automate those textures so they're kind of coming in and out. So here I have the main Europa playing most of the melody, and then certain notes that are getting rejected are just kind of accentuating that melody, providing some different texture with different Europa patches. I think this is so cool. This is something I used to do a lot of manually, exporting audio of different instruments and then cutting them up and, you know, just playing with audio clips. Sometimes I would do it with MIDI clips, but that always got really annoying because you'd have to kind of switch between MIDI clips to see what ones you were cutting out and whatever. So I ended up usually just doing it with audio. But now you can use Note Tool to basically just do it all within the same thing. I think that's so cool. So that's my second example. This third example presents a number of problems. In this example, let me show you what I ultimately was trying to achieve, and then we'll kind of work back and I'll show you why you actually can't do it inside Reason. What I ultimately ended up with and what I was ultimately trying to achieve is something like this. So what I've got going on here is I have 2 different samplers inside Ableton on 2 different tracks. Then what I have is a Reason plugin. I've just got a pattern mutator playing 16 steps because all we're doing is using these to trigger slices of the sampler. Then I've got a Note Tool and a random tool. Again, I'm using the Note Tool in a similar way to example 2, where I am restricting certain hits based on velocity. When it gets triggered, what it's doing is playing one of the slices in my sampler. This is something that has annoyed me about the Reason Rack plugin since it came out. You can only have MIDI going out from a single device. Here's my Reason plugin that's controlling the sampler. Here's the track with the sampler. What I have to do is go, okay, it's coming from this track and then it's coming from the Reason Rack plugin. There's only a single MIDI option, which, you know, is super annoying because it means I can't actually use the reject mode on Note Tool. What I had to do instead was duplicate that Reason plugin, set it up again, only this time I am taking the rejected notes to control the other sampler and play slices when the first sampler isn't playing slices. Might not seem like a big deal, but it gets really, really annoying if you are trying to change settings and you're like, yeah, maybe I want to alter this. And then you're like, okay, cool, let me just copy the patch and go back to the other one. and paste the patch. You have to do that on every single thing you make a change of, and it becomes a whole heap of admin to keep track of what's going on. Now, I don't know what's technically involved to have the opportunity to have multiple MIDI outs on the Reason React plugin, but that's something that I would really love to see, because it would make it a hell of a lot easier to use. Quick side note, let's talk about this random tool, because we haven't touched on that yet, and it's really cool. Basically, it just randomizes parameters, but that allows you to do a whole heap of stuff. So this is a conditional step sequencer. There's a bunch of features that you can use here too. I'm not gonna go into all of it in super detail because Ryan did a fantastic job. But one of my favorite things you can do with it is change it to like 7 steps, which when we are playing in 4/4 typically, that's going to create a situation where it cycles and cycles differently every time until it kind of resets after whatever the maths is. And that gives you some interesting variations in the rhythm. So basically what it's doing here is not playing anything on that step there. So that's cool, big fan of that. Here I'm just using the random pitch. You know, I said I was using a pattern mutator to just have 16 steps. Here I've determined a random pitch to actually give it some variation, because all I'm doing here is using the note tool to trigger random slices on the sampler. So it doesn't matter what the pitch is. In fact, I kind of want all of them represented because I want to be able to trigger random slices on the sampler. Now, there are some other really cool ways you could use this random pitch thing, and if you do want to lock it to a scale, all you got to do is grab your scales and chords and chuck that in as well. You can randomize velocity, which again I used here to get a whole bunch of rejected slices. This one here is super cool. I haven't needed to use it for this application, but it lets you randomize note length. This is a fun one. You'll notice that I'm using Ableton's sampler for this, and the MIDI out device here. My original intention was to try and do that inside Reason, because then I would have been able to just use one instance of the note tool and have the rejected ones going to a separate instance of the sampler. So this was my thing that I set up originally. I had the note tool, had it going to Mimic, and then I had the rejected notes, I believe, going to another version of Mimic. Basically, I was trying to set up the same thing that I have done with the Ableton things inside one instance of Reason. I was like, that would be cool. Couple of major problems. Major problem number one, if I turn this Reason Rack plugin on, well, let's just look up here, have a look. This is my current CPU usage, okay? If I turn this Reason Rack plugin on, let's have a look at my current CPU usage now. Let's just observe this for a second. What the hell is going on here, Reason Studios? Are you serious? Whenever I have Mimic inside a plugin, the Reason Rack plugin, it does this. It peaks my CPU just like that. Now, it's been doing this literally since Mimic got released. This is one of the main reasons why I've never been able to use Mimic. I have updated Reason, I have updated Ableton, I've updated my operating system in that period of time. I'm still getting this issue. So that's, that's the biggest problem, the biggest reason I can't use Mimic here. Second problem, Mimic doesn't have the ability to slice by beat division. It's only got this sensitivity tool. I literally couldn't do what I was trying to do because it's only got this sensitivity tool. What basically every other decent sampler has, I can slice by transient, I can slice by beat, I can slice by region, I can slice manually. If I slice by beat, I have all of these divisions. I've got different playback modes. Why doesn't Mimic have that? Especially now that you've got this note tool thing where you can use it to trigger stuff like I just did. I'm still a little salty about Mimic, to be honest. One of my favorite applications of the new note tool player, you literally cannot do in Reason standalone. You also cannot do inside a single instance of the Reason Rack plugin because Mimic is fundamentally broken and it doesn't have the beat split division thing. And so what you have to do is come up with this workaround where you have to copy and paste your patches twice because the Reason Rack plugin only has a single MIDI out device. So yeah, those are 3 examples of how you can use the new Note Tool and Random Tool player. There are so many more cool ways you can use these 2 players. Like I said, I view them somewhat as glue to the rest of the players. They allow you to kind of chain things together in way more cool, creative ways that I hadn't even thought of before. I am really enjoying using these new Note Tool players. And I think these 2 players, along with the quality of life improvements, really do make Reason 13 a solid upgrade now if you're on any of the previous versions of Reason. I think if you like Reason and you're using Reason or on Reason 12, whatever, upgrading to Reason 13 now, I think is a no-brainer. I think Ripley in particular, Polytune, and these 2 new players are all awesome tools. Big fan. What I am not a big fan of is how Reason just never seems to go far enough in terms of actually implementing something completely. Like I find them all extremely creative. All of the plugins are really cool to use. But often I feel like they just kind of go, yeah, that's good enough. And that creates a situation where, like Ludwig said, there's something they probably could have done in terms of updating chord sequencer to make it work better with pattern or with Note Tool. But yeah, maybe we'll get to it is kind of the attitude. It's like, cool. Would be nice if we, had it now. And like Mimic is a great example. Mimic was released in Reason 12, I think. Why does it still not work properly in the Reason Rack plugin on Ableton? And why is there no beat subdivision? These are things I complained about when they first released Mimic. This is a long time down the line. The fact that Mimic is missing these things means I literally cannot use it inside Reason to do something that seems so simple. And then MIDI out only having a single channel. And then the browser getting restricted with the bounds of the plugin. And then, here's another one. Let's zoom this to 240. How the heck is this useful? If it zooms, I really just want to see the zoomed in plugin, not the zoomed in everything else. Reason has a tendency to add features and do things, but they're only ever, good enough, she'll be fine. They don't ever go the whole way into actually implementing something complete, something that's like polished. It's like we're constantly using a beta piece of software. The browser, it's taken 3 or 4 releases of Reason with a 12, maybe a point update, 13 point update, for the browser to finally get to a point where I think it's actually really good. So yeah, okay. Summing it up, I love everything that's been added in 13.1. I'm very excited about these new players. I just got a little bit frustrated when I started using them and kept running straight back into walls because of things that Reason hasn't really bothered to update yet. So yeah, I did intend to make a video highlighting more of the specific features on Note Tool and Random Tool. But as I was making my examples, I kept running into what I think are problems. And so I thought, rather than make a video highlighting the features, because Ryan has already done that, and I'm sure a bunch of other creators will also be doing that, I thought I would show you the problems that I came across in trying to implement it and the workarounds that I had to do to hopefully save you running into the same problems if you are using them. I'm in a conflicted state again because I do really like these players. I think they're so fun. Seems to be the case every single time Reason updates something. I get conflicting emotions because I'm a big fan. I love Reason And especially now that, like, I cannot understate how much I feel like this random tool and note tool have kind of opened up all of the players again. That's so cool. I just wish that the sandbox that you had to use them in, being Reason, was a little less annoying to use in a lot of instances. Anyway, that's my video. Go update to 13.1 because it's awesome. And if you were not wanting to update to 13 because of the quality of life issues, the browser issues that a lot of people mentioned, I think I've fixed those. So give 13 a chance. Note tool, random tool, Ripley, and Polytune, I think are all incredible plugins, and I've been using them a lot. They're like all go-to ones now. Oh, and the sidechain tool, I forgot about the utility tools. There's so much great stuff in 13. As I said at the start, if you haven't seen my video on Reason 13, where I talk about what I think Reason Studio should do going forward to kind of change up their business model a little bit, check that out. It's the last part of the video I kind of talk about that, but I think what I kind of talk about would be a cool idea. Yeah, I've run out of things to say. I'll make another video sometime, I guess.